Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very excited to make this video. So for those of you who don't know, I like to collect and read comic books. It's kind of like a hobby of mine. And in this video, I am going to be teaching you kind of basic comic book jargon and understanding more about comic books, not necessarily on art, but on terminologies on how you grade a comic book to know how much it's worth, what's the difference between a set, an ongoing series, a hardback graphic novel, a softback graphic novel, and a gigantic Marvel omnibus. I'm going to be just talking about these basic things, so if you are interested in ever collecting comics or you want to know more about comics, this video may just be for you. So the first thing I'd like to discuss is what is a comic book set? A comic book set is not the same thing as an ongoing set or an ongoing series or a comic run. Another word for a comic set is what is known as a mini-series. A comic set is specifically between 1 through maybe 6, 7, up to 10 comic books. So let's say you have a gigantic series of 50 comic books, and from that series, a mini-series is made, and that mini-series is 4 comic books, which would be called what is known as a set. It is essentially a mini-series of a comic book. So to show you what I mean, I actually have a comic book set on my hands right on me. And it is... this is it right here. This is a comic set. This is 4 comic books, as you can see here. These are Deadpool. This is his first ongoing comic book run. A run can also be called a set, but a run typically involves numerous comics, over 10 usually. But this is my comic book set of Deadpool. This was issued in August of 1993, and it's known as Circle Chase, his first ongoing series, 4 comic books. It's a mini-series. There are other Deadpool series, or runs, which consist of over 50 to 60 comic books all in a row. And just remember that a set is different because a set involves a mini-series. It's kind of like a mini TV series on television. Now, in comic books, there's also what is known as graphic novels or softback novels. Now, what this is a book which contains usually more than 5 to 10 comic books in one issue. In other words, let's say you have 50 comic books all in chronological order, a gigantic big series. Well, if it's put in a graphic novel, you would have Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, Volume 4, Volume 5, and each graphic novel would contain 10 comic books within one book. So instead of collecting every individual comic book, which consists of 30 to 40 pages, you have 30 to 40 pages times 10 in a book. So it's a hardback, bigger book that contains 10 issues of a comic book. This is especially helpful if you're trying to save space in your house and you don't want a gazillion comic books to buy graphic novels of the actual comic book series. You save space, and it's a lot more easier to read than to pull out a comic book out of a sleeve and read it and then put it back and pull out another book and read it. Well, you have 10 books all in one. So these right here are exactly what I'm talking about. These are what is known as a softback. This is consists of about 10 comic books. The Punisher, mature comics, as you can see, everything's put into one comic book. This is known as a softback, which means it's bendy. The problem with softbacks is that they wear out very fast, and if you read them a lot, they get crinkles, and they just wear out fast, so I don't usually prefer softback. But sometimes they only bring out series in softback. As you can see that it says Volume 2. There's, I think, like 6 or 7 more volumes of this series all put into one comic book like that. This is my other one, Wolverine. Again, Volume 1 of many. Then there is the hardback versions. This is the death of Captain America during the Civil War, as you can see. This is a hardback version, so meaning when I say hardback, this looks like this, and it does not bend. I love hardback novels or graphic novels, even in just books. It doesn't even have to be comics, mainly because they don't wear out fast, and they're a lot more reliable, and they're heavier, and they're just a lot more well designed and built. It's really interesting how a softback versus a hardback compares in terms of reliability, and you can get a lot more reads out of a hardback book than you can with a softback book. And then here's my other hardback book. This is Deadpool Corpse. I'm not going to show you all my books, but I'm just trying to show you that there's a difference between softback and hardback. You can just see what they look like in terms of one's hard, one's soft. Definitely recommend getting hardbacks if you can, but again, I really recommend getting graphic novels because graphic novels are just a lot more easier to read, having 10 to 15 comic books all in one, like this, instead of buying comic books individually. Which is ironic because I'm saying that you should buy graphic novels like this, but I actually have the graphic novels of this, and then I actually have the entire series of the comic series individually. Like I have each comic book individually, and then I even have the graphic novel, which is kind of a... You normally get the graphic novels if you don't want to have all the individual comic books, but I have both. And of course, there's what is known as the Big Kahuna. This is Marvel Omnibus. These are very hard to find, limited amount of copies made, but this is a gigantic hardback book. You can see how big it is compared to my little hand right here. It's my fist. You can see how big this is. It weighs over 10 pounds. This is an omnibus and contains over 1,000 pages, all of comics, but it's Wolverine. And what this is for is it combines an entire series of comic books. So let's say you have a series of 50 comic books, a run of comic books, and it combines all of them into one in chronological order. This book also contains other issues about Wolverine, which, let's say you have a comic book run of 50 comic books and a mini-series or set goes off of that comic book series. Well, this has it. It's a gigantic book. These are very expensive. I've been trying to get a hold of the Amazing Spider-Man version of this, but it sells for over $250, and I've lost the bid every time I've tried to get it. It contains the first 30 comic books originally published in reprinted in the 1960s of Spider-Man. So I really recommend getting these, but they're heck of expensive, and they're really hard to find. This is volume 1 of several more that are out or being made. They take a long time to make these because of how they're all reprints, but they're all in chronological order in the date and storyline in which they were actually made, which is really cool. Finally, there's what is known as a comic book run. A comic book run is a set of comic books which is predetermined before they're made on how many comic books they're going to make for the series. So this is what a comic book run is. It's a series of comic books which it can be up to 40 comic books, 30 comic books, 100 comic books. In some cases, the Spawn series, which is still being made today, is actually over 300 comic books, and it's still running, and it's still going. This is the character Cable. He's one of my favorite comic book characters. But all these are, I laid these out in chronological order in the dates that they were made and in the order. But you can see them all here. These are individual comic books, and when you have them in a graphic novel, it combines 10 of these into one book. And so instead of having to pull these out and read them every single time, each one individually, which consists of like 30 pages, it's a lot nicer just to have, you know, the hardback versions of something, which is just, it's so much easier to read instead of reading all of these individually. Because these are individual comic books, each one. And there's Incredible Hulk and Cable. And this isn't even half of the actual comic book run. That's the other half. The whole run is in 119 comic books. This ran for almost 10 years when they would make a comic book every single month. And it's an ongoing story. And it's just really cool to have comics made every single month for that long and have the story just continue on and on. So here is the issue that I just showed. This is Incredible Hulk and Cable. I'm going to take this out of the comic sleeve, and we're going to do a very close skim of this comic book. You can see that there's not a single ding, there's not a single bend, there's nothing. This comic book that I'm holding right here is practically perfect. It's in perfect condition. So when it comes to comic books, there's what is known as grading them. A grade essentially is their condition. The higher grade, the higher the number of a comic book, the more it's going to be worth in terms of how the higher quality it is in terms of not being read, not having any dents, not having any ripped pages, not having any bends, and in some cases, maybe never being read ever or even taken out of the package. So a 9.9, a 9.8, a 9.7, it goes from 1 all the way up to 10. A 10 obviously, or a 9.9 would be the highest quality a comic book can go. And usually comic books the first comic book of a series are the ones that are worth the most. For example, the first Superman comic is worth well over $500,000. And it all depends upon the grade of the comic book. If it's a 1.5 grade of a comic book, that means it's going to be really worn and torn, and means it's been read plenty of times. This right here that I'm holding, I would rate a 9.9 or 9.8, although this comic itself isn't worth a whole lot of money. Each comic book is worth about $3 that I showed you from that pile, so. This right here, though, is in perfect condition, and this would be graded a very high grade if I wanted to sell this comic book individually. If this was an 8.5 grade, that would simply mean that there would be like little bends from being read, or little tears, or maybe a watermark, or some sun got on the comic book, and what's it called when the sun bleaches out something. All of those little things affect the value of a comic book itself. There are comic books that sell over several $1,000s on eBay and at comic book stores. And if you ever want to get into comic books, I suggest you buy the comic book sleeves, which is like this. It's the perfect size, and it fits comic books like that. And what this does is, obviously, it keeps them clean from getting dust, it keeps them from getting marks, and when you travel, when you can pack these, you can pack them nice and fit, so nothing gets cut on the edges or pages get bent, because like I just said, it reduces the value of your comics significantly. You can have a comic book that's worth several $1,000s, and a single ding in the corner can reduce it by several hundred or even thousand. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope this kind of gave you some education about comics and the different, what a set is versus a comic book run, a comic book graphic novel, a softback novel, hardback novel, and the different grade systems in which people grade comic books. I can guarantee you that if I live to be 60 years old, I'm still going to be reading comic books. There's just something about reading a story that is drawn out and super visual. Reading a story, having the visual imagery to capture what you're reading is awesome, in my opinion. This is one of the reasons why I love comic books, is because it's a way to tell a story in a very unique way. My name is Daniel Sulzbach, also known as Mr. Repzion. Peace the rep out, and I'm a geek and I am proud of it. No shame.